So imagine this. You've got this fiery, incredibly popular politician sweeping into power.
Right.
Like a historic, absolute landslide victory.
Really totally unprecedented.
Yeah, and he takes the stage, and he is promising this massive revolution for the poor. He's talking about an absolute end to the corrupt billionaire class, a total transformation of the country.
Setting the bar pretty high.
Exactly. But then, his very first move in office, and this is the crazy part, is to impose economic austerity so incredibly strict. I mean, it would make a conservative Wall Street banker blush.
It's quite the pivot, yeah.
It really is. So welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, our mission is to unpack the really complex, honestly contradictory reality of modern Mexico under President Andrés Manuel López Obrador, or as pretty much everyone calls him, AMLO.
AMLO, yeah.
And we are looking at a really fascinating stack of materials today for you guys. We've got academic analyses breaking down his first year in power, some really deep sociological papers on indigenous resistance to mining.
Which is fascinating stuff, by the way.
Super fascinating. And we even have direct, on-the-ground video testimonies from locals living in the Isthmus of Tehuantepec.
Yeah, and actually, before we really get going into all that, we should probably set some quick parameters for you, the listener.
Okay.
Because the events and the policies we're exploring today, they involve some highly charged political perspectives. I mean, we have official government narratives, we have fierce pushback from political critics, and then we have the raw, really passionate voices of grassroots activists.
Right. A lot of different angles.
Exactly. So our goal here is not to endorse any specific side or, any ideology. We are simply going to impartially synthesize the facts, the mechanisms, and the arguments presented in the source material, just so you can get a clear, balanced picture of what is actually happening on the ground in Mexico right now.
Perfectly said. Okay, so let's start with the premise of his presidency because, well, it sets up literally everything that follows.
It does, yeah.
In 2018, AMLO wins this unprecedented victory. He becomes Mexico's first democratic leftist president. And crucially, he's the first president to hold an outright legislative majority since the country fully democratized.
Which gave him massive leverage.
Exactly. He campaigned on this platform of putting the most vulnerable citizens first, ending what he called the corrupt neoliberal era. I mean, he even branded his political movement the fourth transformation of Mexico.
Right, literally placing himself historically right alongside the country's independence and its revolution.
Yeah, no lack of ambition there. But then when you look at the actual data from his first year, this massive hot contradiction emerges. Despite all that leftist rhetoric, he governs with extreme fiscal conservatism.
It is a really striking paradox to navigate because, when you hear the phrase leftist populist with a legislative majority, your historical expectation is...
You expect a massive expansion of the state.
Exactly. You expect higher taxes on the wealthy. You expect heavy deficit spending, huge bureaucratic programs to fund these new social safety nets.
No.
But AMLO explicitly promised not to raise taxes or increase public debt.
Which is wild.
Right. And he actually followed through on that. In his first year, he delivered primary budget surpluses.
Wait, so essentially the government was taking in more money than it was spending? I mean, assuming you don't count the interest payments on the existing national debt.
Exactly, which is a classic textbook austerity metric.
Yeah, he labeled this approach Republican austerity, or at its most extreme, he called it Franciscan poverty.
Franciscan poverty.
Which is a brilliant branding, but wow. And to achieve those surpluses and to tear out what he viewed as a hopelessly corrupt bureaucracy, he enacted these drastic, across-the-board budget cuts throughout the entire state apparatus.
We are talking huge numbers here.
Yeah, firing 30% of health personnel, slashing environmental protection spending by over 20%.
Oh, wow.
Looking at how this Franciscan poverty played out, it feels very much like a desperate household budget. It's like trying to balance your family's finances by canceling your home insurance and firing the guy who patches your roof.
Right.
Sure, you saved a bunch of cash today and your monthly spreadsheet looks fantastic, but the physical house is actively falling apart around you.
That's a great analogy. And, when you fire the person fixing the roof, you aren't just saving money, you are fundamentally restructuring who holds power in the house.
Oh, interesting. How so?
Well, this austerity wasn't just a financial exercise, it was a mechanism to centralize authority. So he took aim at these established, internationally recognized social programs, like the Prosperous system.
Right, the conditional cash transfer program.
Exactly. It gave money to impoverished mothers, but on the condition that they kept their children in school and took them to health clinics.
Okay.
But doing that required a mass bureaucracy of teachers and doctors to verify those conditions.
Which AMLO viewed as just bloated and totally corrupt.
Right. Yep. Yep. So he dismantled it, along with the Seguro Popular healthcare system, and he replaced them with unconditional direct cash transfers.
Just handing out cash.
Basically. But instead of using traditional government ministries to distribute these funds, he deployed a brand new network of what he called superdelegates.
Superdelegates.
Yeah, these are parallel administrative structures that answer directly to the president himself. So they're distributing cash without any institutional mediation.
Wait, but that bypasses the exact checks and balances designed to prevent clientelism.
Exactly.
Like the practice of politicians handing out state resources in direct exchange for political loyalty and votes. Starving the institutions means the power just flows directly back to the executive.
That's the criticism, yes. And there is another glaring pivot here regarding national security.
Oh, right, the military.
Yeah. On the campaign trail, the big promise was to return the military to the barracks, to move away from the heavily militarized drug war of the previous administrations.
But the reality on the ground has been like the exact opposite.
Completely. He created a new National Guard. It was pitched as a civilian police force, but it's largely made up of soldiers, and it's commanded by an army general.
Wow.
And he relied really heavily on the armed forces for everyday public safety, for building his infrastructure projects, and he even deployed them to the borders to contain Central American migrants.
At the explicit request of the U.S. government, right?
Yes, exactly.
So, starving the traditional bureaucracy while consolidating power in the executive and the military, that sent profound shockwaves through the broader Mexican economy.
Oh, absolutely. The centralization created an environment of just intense unpredictability. I mean, in 2019, Mexico's GDP actually shrank by 0.3%.
Which is crazy because, to put that into perspective for you guys, the U.S. economy was growing steadily during that same period.
Right.
And historically, the Mexican economy is glued to the United States. You know the old saying, if the U.S. catches a cold, Mexico gets pneumonia.
Yep.
But in 2019, Mexico got sick while the U.S. was totally healthy.
Well, part of that economic chill came from external fears. The Trump administration was forcing the renegotiation of NAFTA into the new USMCA trade agreement, which created, baseline anxiety for manufacturers.
Sure, that makes sense.
But a massive driver of that economic contraction was severe internal uncertainty generated by the executive branch. Investors simply did not know the rules of the game anymore.
And the absolute prime example of this uncertainty is the airport cancellation.
Oh, yeah.
The airport. Yeah. This was a $13 billion project to build a state-of-the-art international airport in Mexico City. It was already like a third of the way completed.
Yeah.
Billions of dollars in international bonds were tied up in it, and AMLO just cancels it.
Just pulls the plug.
Yeah. Now, I want to push back on the framing of this as an arbitrary authoritarian move for a second, because the sources say he did hold a public referendum to cancel it.
Right.
He put the decision to a vote. So on paper, isn't that just direct democracy in action, letting the people decide?
Well, that is certainly how the administration packaged it. But the academic analyses, looking at the mechanics of that vote, they paint a very different picture. Critics point out that the referendum was not administered by Mexico's independent National Electoral Institute.
Wait, really? Who ran it?
It was organized and run by a private foundation directly tied to AMLO's own political party.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And polling stations were heavily concentrated in municipalities that were already fiercely loyal to his movement.
So the turnout was just inherently skewed from the very start.
Totally. And the turnout itself was barely 1% of eligible national voters.
1%.
1%. So it was widely viewed by economists and political scientists as a mechanism to basically manufacture public consent. It allowed the president to bypass established legal norms and assert his personal authority over these powerful, entrenched economic interests.
And when international markets saw a president willing to scrap a multi-billion-dollar partially built infrastructure project based on a 1% party-run poll.
Investor confidence plummeted.
Of course it did. Which forces a massive pivot in his economic strategy. Because his strict austerity combined with the need to fund these massive direct cash programs through his superdelegates, requires immense streams of state revenue.
He needs cash.
Right. And to get that revenue, he leans into this deep, almost nostalgic obsession with Pemex, this state-owned oil company.
Oh, heavily.
Yeah, at a time when the global conversation is aggressively shifting toward green energy, his administration halts new renewable energy auctions.
Yep.
He prioritizes fossil fuels, pouring an estimated $8 billion into building a massive new oil refinery, Dos Bocas,
Yeah.
right in his home state of Tabasco.
And this top-down desperation for state revenue, that is exactly what drives the narrative from the capital down into the rural South.
A mega project.
Exactly. Because AMLO's vision for infrastructure isn't just about oil refineries. The administration is pushing this highly controversial mega project that is colliding head-on with the people who actually live on top of the resources the state wants to extract.
Right. We are talking about the Isthmus of Tehuantepec. So if you look at a map, this is the narrowest waist of Mexico, the shortest distance connecting the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. The government's plan is to create a special economic zone, or the Trans-Isthmus Corridor.
Right.
The pitch is to build this huge industrial corridor of high-speed freight trains, gas pipelines, and maquiladoras.
Right. And just to clarify, maquiladoras being those massive foreign-owned, tax-exempt factory towns that produce goods purely for export, usually relying on very cheap local labor.
Exactly.
The strategic goal here is to create a direct terrestrial rival to the Panama Canal. It's this geographic choke point that global empires have literally coveted for over a century.
Yeah.
And the federal government pitches this to the public as this historic opportunity to bring modern jobs and quote-unquote development to a historically impoverished region.
But when you watch the local testimonies, the actual voices of the indigenous communities living in the Isthmus, the disconnect is just staggering.
It really is.
You hear local fishermen and mango farmers saying, "We have seen this exact movie before." They point right next door to the cities of Salina Cruz and Minatitlan.
Right.
Those cities have hosted massive state oil refineries and petrochemical complexes for decades. And the state government promised those refineries would bring first world wealth and modernization to the locals.
But the history of those nearby towns serves as a really dark preview for the residents of the Isthmus.
Yeah, they know what happens.
Exactly.
Hey.
The local leaders in the testimonies detail how that previous industrialization actually played out. The refineries didn't elevate the local population, they destroyed the existing local economies.
Right.
The chemical runoff killed the local fishing industry, polluted the beaches, basically forcing the fishermen into low-wage labor. And instead of broad wealth, the influx of transient capital brought what locals describe as super violence.
Super violence, wow.
Yeah, and entrenched organized crime fighting over the new economic spoils.
There is a quote from a local fisherman in the sources that just hits incredibly hard. He says, "Money can arrive in heaps, but that isn't worth our lives, our nature, our sea, because money won't buy the air we breathe when it's gone."
Wow. Yeah, the sociologists analyzing this conflict, they actually use a framework from Jason W. Moore to explain this dynamic.
Oh, right, the four cheaps.
Exactly. Moore argues that global capitalism is driven by a constant race to the commodity frontier to secure the four cheaps: cheap food, cheap fuel, cheap labor, and cheap energy.
And the Isthmus has all of that.
Right. This Trans-Isthmus corridor is structurally designed to open up a brand new frontier. It's built to extract these raw materials as cheaply as possible for global export while leaving all the long-term ecological and social damage hyper-localized in the Isthmus.
But the locals in the Isthmus, they are well aware of this dynamic. They're not just passively watching the trains roll in. They are mounting a fierce ideological and physical resistance.
Yes, they are.
And it is rooted in a completely different worldview.
Yeah.
This isn't just a political disagreement over tax rates. It is literally a clash of ontologies.
Absolutely. The indigenous communities operate on the concepts of comunalidad, which translates roughly to communality, and Gwendolisa, which implies deep, binding obligations to relationships.
Right.
These are lived frameworks that entirely reject the Western dualism that separates society from nature.
Right, because in standard Western economic thought, nature is an external resource, out there, waiting to be managed or extracted or optimized by human society.
Right, exactly.
Now, I have to play devil's advocate for just a second here. Because when people in the suburbs of the U.S. or Europe protest, say, a high-speed train line or a new factory being built near their neighborhood, we often dismiss it as NIMBY-ism.
Sure.
Not in my backyard. So is this resistance in the Isthmus just the Mexican equivalent of imboayism? Like, is it just local property owners who don't want a noisy train lowering their real estate values?
Oh, no, it is the absolute antithesis of Nimmoism, because the very concept of private property values doesn't even apply to their philosophy.
Ah, okay.
Communalidad views the land as the beginning and the end of all life. When a local mango farmer in the town of Zanatepec or a Zapotec fisherman in the coastal lagoons looks at the river, they do not see a water resource to be managed.
What do they see?
They see a living entity, practically a family member that has physically sustained their ancestors and will be required to sustain their grandchildren. They literally refer to the territory as Mother Earth.
Right.
So they aren't fighting to protect an investment portfolio. They state very clearly they are fighting for La Vida, life itself.
Man, that's powerful. And this deep philosophical connection to the land, it actually translates into a highly effective, strategic, on-the-ground resistance. The academics observing this movement call it defensive resistance.
Right, defensive resistance. It's a vital mechanism to understand here.
Yeah.
The strategy is to mobilize the community and block a mega project before a single shovel hits the dirt.
Proactive instead of reactive.
Exactly, because if you wait until a copper mine is fully built to protest the pollution it creates, you already lost. The capital is entrenched, the state is invested, the police will protect the facility.
Yeah, good luck stopping it then.
Right. But if you can generate massive social conflict and legal hurdles during the early exploration and planning phases, you make it incredibly difficult for these transnational companies to raise the necessary investment capital. You starve the project of funding by proving to the markets that the ground is politically unstable.
And these rural communities have a massive structural legal advantage to pull this off, which I found fascinating. The Mexican Constitution.
Yes.
Over 50% of Mexico's land is officially classified as social property. We're talking about ejidos and communal lands. These are territories governed not by private landlords, but by local agrarian assemblies made up of the community members themselves.
That's a huge point.
Without the explicit legal permission of these local campesinos and farmers, foreign mining companies simply cannot legally extract the minerals, regardless of what the federal government in Mexico City decrees.
And the town of Zanatepec used this exact legal roadblock. Facing the threat of Canadian mining companies looking to explore their mountains for gold and copper, local environmental groups partnered directly with the ejido assemblies.
Right.
And together, they used local agrarian law to officially declare their entire municipality a mine-free community. They used the state's own constitutional structure regarding social property to nullify international extraction contracts.
That is brilliant. But to see just how effective and honestly fierce this resistance gets, you have to look at what happened in the town of Ciudad Ixtepec.
Oh, the crowbar story.
Yes.
Yeah.
A Canadian mining company, Plata Real, had quietly been granted a 50-year exploration lease covering 30% of the town's land. And locals had absolutely no idea this had happened in the capital.
They were completely in the dark.
Yeah. And when they finally found out, they didn't just file an appeal in court. A caravan of locals drove high up into the mountains. And it was the indigenous women, including a 73-year-old Zapotec grandmother, who took heavy crowbars and physically smashed the concrete mining landmarks to pieces.
The Mojaneras.
Yeah, the Mojaneras.
That act of smashing the Mojaneras, it is profoundly symbolic, right? Stripping the sacred landscape of its corporate branding. But it is also a brilliant strategic maneuver.
Oh, so?
Because it sends an unequivocal message to both the federal government and the mining corporation. Your property lines hold no authority here, and your financial investment is not secure. It is a physical denial of the land's commodification.
But the federal government, they claim they're doing things by the book, right? They regularly state they're conducting indigenous consultations to get these communities on board with the infrastructure projects.
Yeah, they do hold these events, but the grassroots activists point out exactly how these consultations function as a mechanism of control. They call them simulated consultations.
Simulated? Why simulated?
Well, the state officials don't arrive in a village and ask, yes or no, do you want this open pit mine built here?
Oh, I see.
Instead, they set up a forum and ask, what are your community's most pressing needs? They use a consultation to gather a local wish list, maybe a new school roof or a paved road, and then attach those promises to the mega project. The event is used to manufacture the appearance of consent for a top-down decision that has already been finalized in the capital.
Sneaky. One local woman in the video testimonies summarized the entire conflict perfectly. She said, "We don't know if the development they talk about is understood from up there or from down here,
Wow.
because the development the government wants is measured by extracting gold and laying train tracks.
Mm.
The development the locals want is a stable, clean environment to grow their mangoes and catch their fish."
If we pull back and view the entire trajectory of this deep dive, it reveals an incredible tension.
Yeah, it really does.
On one side, you have the highly popular national leader in Mexico City, aggressively centralizing power, enforcing strict economic austerity, and pushing for rapid state-led industrialization to fund his vision of the country.
And on the other side,
On the other side, you have localized, highly organized indigenous and agrarian communities utilizing ancient philosophies and constitutional land rights to throw sand in the gears of that exact industrialization.
we've traveled from the halls of power, where budgets are slashed to centralize control, all the way down to the isthmus, where a Zapotec grandmother is literally wielding a crowbar to protect her river from foreign capital.
And what is vital to understand here is that this dynamic extends far beyond Mexico. This is a universal clash playing out across the globe right now.
Definitely.
It is the fundamental conflict between top-down state development, driven by the global demand for cheap nature and resources, and grassroots ecological survival. It forces a reckoning with how national economic ambitions interact with the rights of the people who actually live on the targeted land.
Which leaves you with a final thought to ponder. If a national government defines progress by the millions of ounces of gold extracted, or the sheer volume of cargo shipped across an industrial corridor, but the people actually living on that land define progress by clean drinking water and an intact, stable community who ultimately gets to decide what a country's future should look like. And when those two definitions of progress inevitably collide, what does democracy actually mean?
An incredibly powerful question to sit with.
It really is. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the narratives and keep exploring.